Hello friends, welcome back to English Classes Online. My name is Benjamin. Today's video is on how to use relative clauses in English. This is part of our English grammar lesson series. If you are new to this channel, kindly subscribe to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. Click also on the bell icon so that whenever a new video is uploaded on the channel, you will be notified instantly. Let's dive into the lesson right away. First, let's look at the agenda for today's episode. Number 1, what is a relative clause? 2, what are the relative pronouns that introduce relative clauses? 3, types of relative clause. And 4, how to use relative clauses in sentences. We are going to discuss this one by one. What is a relative clause? A relative clause is a subordinate clause that begins with a relative pronoun and tells more about a person or thing. It is also proper to say that a relative clause is essentially an adjectival clause because it describes a person or thing, which is essentially what an adjectival clause does. Now let's examine this sentence. Now if we look at this quite critically, then we'll be able to look at it. Junior is the boy who slapped his mother. Now, the relative clause here is who slapped his mother. Now, you can see that first and foremost, this clause is an adjective or an adjectival clause. How do we know? Essentially, an adjective, an adjectival phrase, or an adjectival clause usually provides answer to a question which one or which type. Normally when you want to define something or describe something, that's what an adjective does. It modifies a noun or a pronoun. Now let's look at this. Junior is the boy. And then if we put a full stop here, if we say Junior is the boy, now there is a question that naturally arises. And the question is, which boy are you talking about? And so to give more information about the boy in question, then this clause provides the answer. Who slapped his mother? That's the boy we are talking about. The boy who slapped his mother. So who slapped his mother is giving us more information about boy. And so boy here is a noun, and it is the antecedent of this relative clause. All right? An antecedent is something that comes before something else. So now, whenever we find a relative clause in a sentence, now what happens is that the relative clause is attached to the antecedent. The antecedent here is boy. This is the antecedent. That is exactly the person in focus. The person about whom this relative clause is telling us something more. The relative clause is telling us something more about the boy. And so we find that the relative clause is usually attached to this antecedent, by a relative pronoun, and this is the relative pronoun. Who is the relative pronoun? We are going to look at other relative pronouns, but in this specific example, the relative pronoun is who. All right, so this is exactly what a relative clause is all about. Now let's move further. Now, what are the relative pronouns that introduce relative clauses? Already we have seen one of the relative pronouns in the example we already discussed, and the relative pronoun we saw in that example is who. Now, let's look at others. Now, relative clauses can be introduced by any of the following relative pronouns, and of course, they are as follows: whom, whom, which, that, and whose. Now, when you look at this, who, whom, and whose are usually, used to talk about persons. All right? Which is used to talk about things. This is the book which you asked me to buy. This is the man who, this is the woman whom, all right? This is the girl whose, father died or something. So we use who, whom, and whose to talk about persons. We use which to talk about things. We use that to talk about persons or things. We can use that for persons. We can use that for things as well. All right, so now let's look at types of relative clause. Types of relative clause. There are two types of relative clauses. One, defining relative clause, and two, non-defining relative clause. Now you can take specific note of their names. A defining relative clause and a non-defining relative clause. Now these are the two types of relative clauses. Let's examine them one by one. Number one, defining relative clause. This type of clause is used to indicate, specify, or clarify which person or thing we are talking about. So, in other words, it's called a defining relative clause because it directly identifies the person or thing we are talking about. Now, let's look at this example. All right. Adiche is the woman who wrote this novel. All right. So who wrote this novel is the defining relative clause here. And why do we call it a defining relative clause? As the name implies, it defines the woman we are talking about. How do we know that? Now, let's use the grammatical principle known as the border principle. Now, the woman and the relative pronoun that introduces this relative clause share a common border. So this is the boundary between them. All right. So when we come to this boundary, that's what we call the border principle. Now let's put a full stop. Now if we say Adiche is the woman and we put full stop, naturally it raises a question because the listener will want to know which woman you are talking about, particularly which woman. So if someone says Adiche is the woman, the question that naturally arises is which woman? Which woman are you talking about? And so who wrote this novel is the relative clause that defines the woman we are talking about, that specifies the woman we are talking about, that indicates to us specifically the particular woman we are talking about. And that is why we call this the defining relative clause because it defines the noun that is being talked about. Adichie is the woman. Which woman? Who wrote this novel? That is the woman we are talking about. All right. So let's look at example B. This is the car which Sam bought. Okay. Which Sam bought is the defining relative clause. And so, using the same border principle, we put a full stop here between car and which. And so, when we say this is the car, the listener is not satisfied with this information. The listener wants to know about the car that the speaker is talking about. And that is exactly the work of the defining relative clause. It provides the specific information, the information that specifies or defines the person or thing being talked about. This is the car. Which car? The car which Sam bought. All right. So that is exactly what the defining relative clause is all about. It gives us information that defines the person or thing we are talking about. Now, let's probe further into what a defining relative clause is all about. We have seen the two examples, and we have seen that in each case, the relative clause directly identifies the person or thing being talked about. We can use the relative pronoun that instead of who or which, because when you use that, it's a very important relative pronoun that we use in a defining relative clause. So let's use it to replace who and which in these two examples. Now, example A, Adichie is the woman that wrote this novel. So you can see exactly we use that to replace who. In B, this is the car that Sam bought. All right, that Sam bought. So again, we use that to replace which in example B. Now, one other interesting thing we can do is that we can remove that in example B. We can leave out that completely. We can leave out the relative pronoun completely, and we connect, we connect the information directly to the car. And this is done because, you discover that that information is essential to, the identity of the thing we are talking about. So we can say this is the car Sam bought. This is the car Sam bought. So we have removed which instead of saying this is the car which Sam bought or this is the car that Sam bought. We can simply say this is the car Sam bought. Now you see the direct and the definite information that the defining relative clause provides. We can see that the defining relative clause forms part of the core meaning of the sentence. It is central to the identification of the noun being talked about. That is also why it is called an essential. It is called the essential relative clause. We are going to look at the other one, which is non-essential, but this one is essential because if you remove the relative clause, then the sentence is incomplete. If we say this is If we say Adiche is the woman, something is missing. Part of the core meaning of what we intend to convey is missing. If we say this is the car, then again the essential part of the meaning or that we want to convey is also left out. So you can't leave out the defining relative clause because it is central to the information we want to convey. Now, the information that a defining relative clause provides is part of the core meaning of the entire sentence. The information is essential to the meaning of the sentence, such that removing it renders it incomplete. For example, if you say Adiche is the woman, it raises the question, which woman? So the defining relative clause provides the essential information and defines the identity of the person or thing being talked about. That is the defining relative clause. Now, this brings us to the non-defining relative clause. This type of relative clause merely gives additional or extra information about the person or thing being talked about. It is called a non-essential relative clause because the information it gives is not part of the core meaning of the sentence. So let's take note of this. There's a typo here. Actually, what we want to say is that the information is not, okay, is not part of the core meaning of the sentence. Whereas in the case of the defining relative clause, the information provided is part of the core meaning of the sentence. Now, because this is the information provided by the non-defining relative clause is not central to the meaning, then it is non-essential, which means we can even remove it and yet the meaning of the sentence is intact. All right, so let's look at an example. Now, example here is my uncle who lives in Warri. Okay, so let's try to analyze this. My uncle who lives in Warri is a doctor. All right, now who lives in Warri is actually the non-defining relative clause. As you can see here, the non-defining relative clause is separated with commas. So we can see here, my uncle, comma, who lives in Warri, comma, is a doctor. So why do we separate the non-essential, the non-defining relative clause with commas? This is to show that the information provided here is just additional. It is extra information. It's not part of the core meaning. It doesn't really, we don't need it to define the uncle we are talking about. All right. So we can see here that the information it gives is secondary or additional. The sentence really implies this. Let me wipe this so that it won't confuse us. Now, the sentence implies this. My uncle is a doctor. By the way, he lives in Warri. So my uncle is a doctor is the actual thing the speaker wants to say. Now, the question being addressed is, who is my uncle, or what is his profession? That is what this sentence is all about. The other one is merely, additional information provided by the way, So my uncle is a doctor. Well, by the way, that is if you care for this additional information. This my uncle who is a doctor lives in Warri. I'm giving you additional information about my uncle. You may or may not really need that information, but what is central is that my uncle is a doctor. So this is exactly how the non-defining relative clause operates in English sentences. Now, let's look at how to use relative clauses in English sentences. All right? Now, a relative clause is used to give extra information about a noun in the main clause of a sentence. Well, from our examination or analysis of the defining and non-defining relative clauses, we can see that the type that gives extra information is the non-defining. The defining relative clause gives primary information, while the non-defining gives extra information. So let's get this right. Now, a relative clause is usually attached to the noun in the main clause, which is that noun is called the antecedent. I earlier referred to that, by any of the relative pronouns, and we have seen the relative pronouns who, whom, which, that, and whose. Now, these are the relative pronouns that can be used to introduce relative clauses. Now, let's look at how to use these relative clauses in English sentences. Now, let's begin to look at them, looking at the pronoun that introduces each relative clause. Now, let's begin with who. Jack is the boy who broke the windscreen. Now, you can see that we use the relative pronoun to introduce the relative clause. So the relative clause here is who broke the windscreen. All right, this is the boy who broke the windscreen. And what the relative pronoun does, the relative clause does, is that it is part of the noun phrase. Now, let's attempt to analyze this sentence. Let me show you exactly what I mean by this. Now, let's break the sentence into its components called the elements. Now, Jack is the subject of this sentence. Is the verb, while the boy who broke the windscreen is the complement. So here we have a sentence that has the SVC structure. Now, if you want to know the element, if you want to know more about the elements of the sentence, you can look for a video I uploaded on this channel, which is titled Elements of Sentence or Sentence Elements. All right, you have 5 sentence elements: subject, verb, object, complement, and adjunct. So we call it SVOCA. SVOCA. All right, these are the 5 elements of sentence. Please take note of this. This is A. All right, SVOCA. Don't mind these distortions here, please. And then this is O actually, so please look at it. This is O. SVOCA. These are the 5 elements of sentence, and of course each element of sentence occupies its rightful position within the sentence structure. And what I want us to see is that the boy who broke the windscreen is the complement, is just one component of the sentence, and this real component of the sentence is essentially what we call the noun phrase. That's NP. All right, the noun phrase. So the boy who broke the windscreen is a noun phrase, and who broke the windscreen is just doing the job of an adjective. That's essentially what it does. All right, probably we might say that Jack is the careless boy we are talking about. The word careless is an adjective, but instead of just using careless to describe Jack, then we can explain what Jack did, you know, to show how careless he is. This is the boy who broke the windscreen. So who broke the windscreen is an adjective that is modifying the noun boy. All right. So that is exactly what we we how we use the relative clause. We use the relative clause like an adjective to modify a noun. Now let's look at the second one, which is introduced by the relative pronoun whom. I want you to understand the difference between who and whom. Who is usually used as a subject in a sentence, while whom is used as an object. Now, if you want to know more about the difference between who and whom, you can look for a video that I uploaded which explains the difference between who and whom. And the video is entitled How to Improve Your English Grammar, you know, the difference between who and whom. So different grammatical principles are explained in that video. Now, using whom, we can use whom to introduce a relative clause as follows. This is the girl whom Jack raped. We can see the difference between who and whom here. In the first example, who broke the windscreen is telling us about the doer of the action, you know, which is the subject. And here in this second one, whom Jack raped is not telling us about the doer of the action, but the receiver of the action, the victim of the offense committed. This is the girl whom Jack raped. All right. All right. So now let's look at the next one using the relative pronoun which. We can use it to introduce a relative clause as follows. The bag which I bought last week has been stolen. All right. You can see that this is a non-refining relative clause, which is why we separate the clause with commas. All right. So in other words, the bag has been stolen. That's exactly what the speaker wants to say. And of course, if someone wants to know more, you know, get extra information about the bag he's talking about, then he can say the one I bought last week. Well, the bag has been stolen. By the way, that was the bag I bought last week. All right. Then let's look at how we can use the relative pronoun that in a relative clause. Samson was the man that killed a lion with his bare hands. All right, so that killed a lion with his bare hands. That is the relative clause in this sentence. Then the last one, using the relative pronoun whose, we can come up with this example. He is the doctor whose clinic was demolished. All right, whose clinic was demolished. This is the doctor whose clinic was demolished. The relative clause here is whose clinic was demolished. So these are examples of how we can use relative clauses in meaningful English sentences. And this is where we are going to draw the curtain in today's video. I hope you have really learned something from today's video. We have been looking at how to use relative clauses in English. which is part of our English grammar lesson. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, don't forget to like the video, click on the like button, click also on the share button, and make sure you share the video with your friends and relations. If you have not subscribed to this channel, kindly subscribe to the channel because it's really very important. When you subscribe to this channel, you achieve a win-win situation because actually you lose nothing. You are not going to pay for subscribing. It is free of charge, and in addition to that, when you subscribe, you will have free access to all the videos I upload on this channel. And by the way, I upload videos every week. I upload videos that teach English topics, and I also upload videos that teach content writing, content creation, content marketing, digital marketing, copywriting, all those related skills that will share ideas with you on how to make money online by establishing an online business. You know, these are the ideas we share here on this channel. You might be surprised that we are combining English learning with content marketing. They are related because essentially a language is the vehicle or the most powerful tool for communication. To communicate your ideas effectively, you need a mastery of the language. You need to achieve proficiency in the language that you are using, and that is exactly what we are doing on this channel. We are using and maximizing the power of the language in communicating ideas, and I teach you exactly how to use language to communicate your ideas, how you can establish different online businesses, how you can create ebooks, how you can create all kinds of digital products and market them and make money for yourself. All these and many more we discuss right on this channel. So it is really a very important channel to subscribe to, and I implore you to kindly subscribe to this channel and also share information about this channel with your friends and relations, and God will definitely bless you. I want to thank all of you who have been giving me massive support. I have also witnessed tremendous increase in the number of subscribers. More and more people are getting interested in this channel because we provide value on this channel. And I want to thank you, all of you who have been very supportive. I want you to know that I highly esteem and value all of you out there, and I want to say a big thank you to all of you. I also want to assure you that anytime you have any comments, any concerns, any suggestions, you can freely comment on the comment section below, and I will respond with dispatch. If you are among those who have asked questions or made suggestions or even suggested some topics that you would like me to discuss on this channel, you will bear witness, you will agree with me that I have responded. There are many of the videos on this channel which I have uploaded in direct response to the demands or requests of our esteemed viewers and subscribers on this channel. So once again, I want to say a big thank you to all of you. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye bye for now.